Well, welcome back for part 3 of Good Fight Forevermore special, brought to you by Straight Shooting News and Stone Bandana. Well, for watch part 1 and part 2, you'll see what I'm going to call this segment. Will Dr. Fauci retire and make a run for it to hide from justice? Part 1 and part 2, I urge you to watch it because the points are made. I mean, I'm sitting here, people are talking about gaining control back of Congress while these psychopaths are still operating in the background, and what caused Fauci to panic. I think he's made a plan B to escape because he no longer feels protected by the deep state and all these people who actually committed crimes against humanity and treason against our nation, which is punishable by death, which is why we've really got to watch the next few months to see what's going to transpire. So what we have here is we got, as soon as the word came out about Fauci, a lot of the news people jumped on. If you're watching MSNBC or CNN, they're blowing smoke up Fauci's ass. Oh, he's a great guy. And well, if you want to listen to that, you're probably going to make yourself very vulnerable to a hard reality that could be coming our way. So with that being said, we're going to go to these doctors here that were speaking up from the very beginning. We've got clips, and maybe if I get the time, I can go back to some of our first shows and show you what these same doctors are talking about. But they did a pretty good job of putting the pieces together here. We're going to bring you some clips from yesterday after the announcement. And then one just before that really could have pushed Fauci over the edge when it comes to the courts. But here, let's play the first one here with Dr. Risch. The 3 sins made by Fauci.
Fond farewell to Dr. Fauci. Now, one of the premier members, the original members of the Ingram Angle Medicine Cabinet is here to respond. Plus, Congressman James Comer is going to tell us why Fauci's retirement doesn't mean Fauci gets to escape congressional scrutiny if the GOP takes control. Stay there. As you've heard by now, the pinup boy of the public health sector, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has announced his retirement. Well, it's coming in December. While he told the Washington Post today that he's a totally non-political person, he ran to the warm embrace of MSNBC's Rachel Maddow tonight.
There were so many things we learned on the run with COVID. I mean, the things that we thought we knew in the beginning turned out as the months went by to not be the case, which really forced us to adapt and to change some of our policies and recommendations. That was interpreted by many as flip-flopping or not really knowing what's going on, when it really was the evolution of the science.
Joining me now is Dr. Harvey Risch, epidemiology professor emeritus at Yale School of Public Health. Dr. Risch, your reaction to that, it was an evolution. They were learning things on the run. Is that how immunology works?
Well, it might be, but not in the present case, because that answer explains everything and nothing. You can say anything happened and anything changed, and it doesn't explain anything. And we know that Dr. Fauci made some very substantial misstatements about a number of items. And to say that now the science shows that the vaccines don't work, and we said that a year ago, and now the CDC agrees that they don't work to prevent transmission, and Dr. Fauci, where does that leave him?
What are his 3 cardinal sins when it came to the COVID issue, Professor Risch?
The first was that he worked actively to suppress early outpatient treatment with hydroxychloroquine. He labeled non-randomized but controlled studies, he called them anecdotal. That's a falsehood. Anecdotal means a study of 1 person or 2 or 3, and not dozens and hundreds of people. Second, and further on to that, is he was involved in stopping the one NIH study that was actually testing hydroxychloroquine, and he didn't fund any further studies to look at hydroxychloroquine when there was a gaping need for early treatment. So that was the first thing. The second thing was his gain-of-function research that's now established that it was gain-of-function research, that he lambasted Senator Paul saying you don't know what you're talking about. And in fact, Senator Paul was quite correct. And many scientists have affirmed that this has been gain of function research that Fauci funded it against the law, and yet Fauci did it. And the third thing were the lockdowns and the masking, that at all costs he supported and forced on the population to the destruction of the huge economic and psychological destruction of large segments of the country for no scientific benefit.
Well, it's shocking that Rachel Maddow didn't get to any of that tonight. Now, she also did ask Fauci, though, about the demonization of him because he's the victim here, not all the kids who were locked out of school. Here was his response.
What we're dealing with now is just a distortion of reality, Rachel. I mean, conspiracy theories which don't make any sense at all, pushing back on sound public health measures, making it look like trying to save lives is encroaching on people's freedom.
Freedom. Kind of scoffed at that really dismissively.
Well, the standard answer is if you don't like what somebody's saying, you call them a conspiracy theorist. But what I would call it is we're conspiracy observers. That Event 201, for example, had hundreds of people in a room conspiring about how to take over the world on the basis of an infectious pandemic. That's a conspiracy because of all the people involved in it. So, you can call them theorists, but we're observers. We observe these conspiracies.
Dr. Risch, thank you for being the voice of reason on this program throughout this pandemic. You are going to be with us, continue to be with us on this topic, which is not going to go away. We appreciate you. Now, the timing of...
All right. So what did Dr. Risch have to say, who's been opposing this from the beginning? Rand's hearing blows everything that Dr. Fauci has been saying or said today or said previously right out of the water. You just heard it. If you watch segments 1 and 2, you will completely understand that fact. He held back treatments. People banned from social media. We're going to show you a piece on that at the end for bringing up these treatments that actually worked. This is just like when they brought up Bactrim for AIDS patients that were dying, and Fauci deliberately held them back. He would not allow them to be treated. Doctors had to go forward and do it himself. And Dr. Risch made that point several weeks ago on his show, where he said doctors were treating patients with known treatments that we had that were inexpensive and not telling anybody about it because they didn't want to lose their license and be ridiculed by the medical society because Fauci would have came after him. This is concerning. Like I said, why would he want to run? Because he committed some serious crimes and caused, we hope it's repairable damage, but it's going to take a while to repair. Okay, second, that was the second point. And then everything he did, everything that they called for, from masking, the jabs, mandates, social distancing, nothing benefited society. It left a scar on adults, on children, and then the word freedom. Well, folks, if you really don't like living in this country and the freedoms it provides for you, go someplace controlled. Try someplace like communist China. Go to a country where they'll lock you right up in your homes and let you die or take you away at will. I mean, even countries like Australia went through that. We saw many clips on that, and other countries. People had to protest in the street. Britain was doing it. I mean, this got totally bizarre. But now let's listen to Representative James Comer and the investigations.
Fauci's announcement was interesting. It happened just days after the NIH finally said that they would end the subaward to the Wuhan Institute. Now, after its continued refusal to hand over key info about the coronavirus research that was conducted with our tax dollars. So if Fauci thinks this retirement would save him from a congressional investigation or a subpoena, our next guest says, well, he has another thing coming. Joining us now is Kentucky Congressman James Comer, ranking member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman, you will take over the House in January. What can Dr. Fauci expect Republicans to do?
Well, we have a lot of questions for Dr. Fauci. As you know, Laura, he hasn't ever testified in front of the House since COVID started. So there are so many questions that members have. We've already told Dr. Fauci to preserve all of his documents and all of his emails. But one thing the House Oversight Committee has already unearthed were the initial emails back in January and February of 2020, when his earliest advisors said, by looking at this gene sequence, it appears that this was man-made. So it had to come from the Wuhan lab. Now, Dr. Fauci never told the public that there were advisors to him that said this originated in the Wuhan lab. Those are the main questions that Republicans on the House Oversight have for Dr. Fauci. Why didn't you tell the Trump administration early on, and why didn't you tell the American people early on that even your closest advisors suggested that this virus originated in the Wuhan lab?
Well, why has he been still standing for all these redactions in the FOIA requests about their internal deliberations about this? I mean, he wanted all this stuff redacted, right? I mean, he certainly wasn't asking for more transparency on any of that. I know you're going to ask him about that as well. But despite telling the Post, as I said, Congressman, that he wasn't political, well, you be the judge whether he got political tonight with Maddow.
Do you have insight into what we ought to do to protect public officials like yourself and to try to be more rational about this stuff as a country?
What has spilled over and really in many respects impeded a proper response to a public health challenge is something that we see that goes well beyond public health. You could look at January 6th on TV. What's going on out there now with the distortion of reality is very troublesome.
January 6th invoked there. Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised. You know, if I were Dr. Fauci, I would want to come before Congress and answer questions. I would want to defend my reputation because he's retiring with a very tarnished reputation. Dr. Fauci has not been truthful with the American people. The emails that I referenced a minute ago, they were sent to us originally heavily redacted, and we sent a staffer in to the CDC, NIH, and got them redacted. And, you know, we transcribed those emails. So that's how we know what happened. It's not because of anything that Dr. Fauci told us. He has done everything in his ability to obstruct any type of congressional oversight, but more importantly, he's done everything he can to obstruct any type of investigation, even from the intelligence community early on and from the Trump administration, to try to determine the origination of COVID-19. I think the reason that Dr. Fauci is retiring is because now that the dust is settled, the scientists who he always refers to are now realizing that the odds that this originated in the COVID lab, in the Wuhan lab, are almost 100%.
Well, he threw in a reference to the wet markets tonight in general about future pandemics. He talked about the rainforest and the wet markets that we have. Well, I think the wet markets are disgusting, but that was kind of another, nod to the origins theory. So we don't have time to play it, but suffice it to say that was mentioned. Congressman Comer, we're going to be watching this closely. Thank you so much.
All right. What did we just hear there? The CDC ends grants to communist China. What does that actually mean? Now, let's dig deep into that statement. Fauci's biggest protection from being exposed, especially if this becomes a crisis of like crimes against humanity or treason, is him handing out money. It's sort of like what Biden's doing with the IRS. The government needs more armed government officials who are sucking off the government like parasites. And hopefully they'll be on their side when we, the people, exercise what is said in here under our Bill of Rights. It's up to us to protect our liberty. It's getting to the point where more and more people wake up and realize they better do it because the government's not protecting them from anything. Okay? They're holding back documents. Why is they holding back all these documents? Because they'll expose the cover-up. And this Dr. Fauci wants protection, and Maddow is saying he needs protection from the terrible public and the people who are calling him out. He just murdered millions of people. Let's get that straight. Okay, Maddow, CNBC, CNN, and the rest of you friggin' cronies out there, you're just toadies for evil. And this is going to be exposed one way or another. Let's hope we can do it peacefully and by the Constitution. You know, the only one causing chaos here is Fauci and his cronies. And now they lost the financial cover. Don't be surprised if you hear some country, someone in there looking to save their own butts, because this is what happens. Evil always feels because they have this connection. And when they want to be the ones taking over, or they're the ones that feel jeopardized, they start to save their own butts. But it's up to us to put the pressure on. Now let's move to this next segment with Dr. Atlas, who was part of Trump's COVID team, who was in the White House with Fauci when all this was occurring. Roll that.
Killed, no punishment. Tony Fauci gets to collect his enormous government retirement, and he'll be lecturing you from the stage at CNN very, very soon. So what exactly are Republicans going to do about this when and if they take power in January? What else has Tony Fauci lied about? Dr. Scott Atlas worked with Tony Fauci in the White House. He's a senior fellow in healthcare policy at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He joins us tonight. Doctor, pardon the overheated assessment, but I mean, it's very frustrating to watch someone who at the very least has been wrong and whose wrong statements have tremendous consequences, never even being asked about it.
Yes, well, you know, I'll say his legacy is presiding over the greatest debacle in public health history, because his recommendations were implemented, and those implementations of the lockdowns and the school closures that he recommended, along with his underling, Dr. Birx, failed. They failed by the data to stop the spread of the infection. They failed to stop the known vulnerable to die from dying, and they inflicted enormous harms. They spared the affluent and the elite at the sacrifice of the poor, minorities, and our children. The sinful and long-lasting damage to our children is one of his legacies, because those policies of masking, isolating, and quarantining healthy children introduced massive fear in them, damaged them really to make them think that they're vectors of disease and everyone's a danger for them. We haven't even seen the tip of the iceberg of that damage, but we've already seen skyrocketing self-harm visits by teenagers, suicidal ideation, mental illness skyrocketing, child abuse going unreported, massive surges in childhood obesity, a public health problem, serious learning losses, particularly among the poor and low-income families, again, sparing the affluent. He also presided over the NIH's total failure to conduct the necessary clinical trials on already approved low-cost drugs, along with his friend and associate, Francis Collins, as you mentioned. Now, the second big category of his damage, his legacy really, is the extraordinary distrust now in the public of our public health agencies. I mean, this is critical and very harmful to the future crises, but also to the institutions themselves that we need to trust as people. His erratic proclamations, usually with no scientific evidence whatsoever, I saw that personally. His use of fear, intentionally fear to sway the public. He explicitly said it in the task force. His own emails, as you pointed out, to suffocate the free exchange of ideas. This is antithetical to science. And the unacceptable centralization of power of a 40-year bureaucrat instead of being just issuing recommendations. You know, the bottom line is we woke up now to needing to eliminate the power of a corrupt central bureaucrat and restore medical ethics back into public health. This is his legacy.
Exactly. And thank you for making that point. And you make it with greater credibility than really anybody else. The institutions themselves that we need have been gravely damaged, and I appreciate your saying that. Dr. Scott Atlas, thank you.
Institutions have been greatly damaged. The damage they've done to the poor, the children, how many people lost loved ones, how many people had to suffer through all this. Dr. Atlas is pretty direct. And the damage to the institutions, oh my God. I'll tell you a little bit about Obama's statement on transforming America and winning, and how you know when you won the battle at the end. But let's roll this next clip with Senator Kennedy on Hannity's show.
Doom and gloom, flip-flop Fauci announced his departure from the National Allergy and Infectious Disease Center, saying he's ready to start the next phase of his career. But isn't it kind of interesting that Fauci is now bolting just days after the CDC chief announced that a massive agency shakeup is coming? They admitted to massive failures in terms of our country's COVID response. Don't you think these two things aren't connected? You may want to think again if you do, because they most certainly are. Remember, Fauci still needs to be held accountable for all of the lies and misdirection, his flip-flopping on masks, saying vaccines will stop all transmission, etc., not really focusing on therapeutics that worked from the very beginning, and allegedly falsely telling Congress that the U.S. never funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan virology lab, and he knew damn well that wasn't true, and consistently deflected on the issue. Here's a flashback between Fauci and Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana only last year. Take a look.
Dr. Fauci, I believe you have testified that you didn't give any money to the Wuhan lab to conduct gain-of-function research. Is that right?
That is correct.
How do you know they didn't lie to you?
Excuse me, sir?
How do you know they didn't lie to you and use the money for gain-of-function research anyway?
Well, we've seen the results of the experiments that were done and that were published, and that the viruses that they studied are on public databases now. So none of that was gain of function. So
how do you know they didn't do the research and not put it on their website?
there's no way of guaranteeing that, but in our experience with grantees, including Chinese grantees, which we've had interactions with for a very long period of time, they're very competent, trustworthy scientists.
Joining us with reaction, Senator John Kennedy.
And this is my second point. Unless you do your research on Twitter, you know that the American people have many, many questions about how Dr. Fauci, other public health officials, and our government handle the pandemic. And getting answers to those questions from Dr. Fauci and others has been like trying to slam a revolving door. Now, the Democrats are in charge. They refuse to press, but the Republicans will. So here's my prediction. If Republicans take back one or both houses of Congress, and unless Dr. Fauci, retirement or not, decides to seek asylum in some remote, obscure foreign country,
Maybe
whose
how about
Powerball jackpot
maybe
is,
Wuhan, China will take them.
well, unless Dr. Fauci decides to seek asylum in some foreign country whose Powerball jackpot is 287 chickens and a goat, and therefore which won't enforce a subpoena from the United States Congress, then Dr. Fauci, retirement or not, is going to be spending a lot of time in front of a congressional committee and committees if Republicans take back control. We're going to ask him questions about gain-of-function research, why he didn't push back on China's lies, why he pushed back so hard on the possibility, which we know is now real, that the virus originated in a Chinese lab, why he went along with the greatest dissipation, if that's the right word, greatest taking of civil liberties of the American people in the history of our country, we're going to have a lot of questions, and we're going to subpoena him and expect him to answer. And I would not advise Dr. Fauci to put down a non-refundable deposit on a cruise.
Well, let me ask you this, because we have his emails in January of 2020 in a flurry of emails among other NIH executives that seemed to show great concern what might be found out about monies going to the Wuhan Virology Lab. Then you have the Intercept 900 pages they revealed and Project Veritas. And then we have, I believe it was October of 2020 or 2021, the NIH's own emails show that they knew about gain-of-function research. Do you believe Dr. Fauci purposely lied to the American people about what he knew about the coronavirus, about the Wuhan Virology Lab, and about American tax dollars funding gain-of-function?
I don't know, but we need to find out. And it's not about Republicans or Democrats, and it's not about Dr. Fauci. It's about the American people. Now, they've been through hell, in part on the advice of Dr. Fauci. Maybe he was right, but maybe he was wrong. And in the last conversation I had with Dr. Fauci, with respect to whom I bear no ill will, he was in front of a committee. They only gave me 5 minutes. I asked him a simple question. What did we learn from the pandemic? And I got a felonious amount of BS. Now, the Democrats won't press, but if we take back control of this Congress, we will. And retirement or not, he will be subject to a congressional subpoena. And the American people deserve answers. They have been through hell. And to say nothing of the fact that we may have to go through this sometime again soon. We want to be ready.
We better be ready. Well said, Senator.
Just clear here. All right. What Senator Kennedy said sounds really good. I'm not a Republican, but I'll tell you, I'll vote GOP right down the line to get them to take control. But if the GOP doesn't immediately go after these people for what they did and turn around with this, you see this whole thing with Rand saying, oh, it could be, and then you have Kenny, I wish him no ill will. This man just murdered millions of people. And everything he complained about, the taking of civil liberties, the most ever in history. I mean, if they don't do what they need to do, then we the people have to embrace our founders' wisdom about what they wrote for us. In the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, we are directly responsible for our own liberty. And that right shall not be infringed. But let me say this. Now, the reason why we have to let the process go through its course is because that wonderful traitor that everybody thought was so great to have as president, because you all were too busy being politically correct to understand who the hell President Obama was. He said at one time, and I'm going to paraphrase from one of his speeches about how you transform a country. We all know he's going to transform America. He said it was you cause doubt. You have the people doubt their institutions and the trust of what's going on. And that's where we're at right now. So that plan is working, which is why, even though some people are getting pretty spooled up, you have to wait to see if our institutions and our design can take care of it before we, the people, take action. The most we can do now is stop conforming with all of it. all of it. When someone says you got to do this, you tell them, no, I got this. You have to take a stand in that way, but don't get spooled up until this all goes. And the other question is, the reason why we do have to go and vote GOP, because the Democrats won't press. They won't press this issue. Why not? They know something isn't right here. They can act stupid all they want, but Rand Paul's hearing, there's a reason why we did this tonight, to bring you information. We're going to break it up into segments for you people who only have like so many minutes at a time, and we're going to post it up in seconds so that you take your time to understand what was exposed. So if you want to see what was exposed, here's a short clip from Laura and what she did just on her show alone. Here she's boasting what she did. Roll the short clip.
David, Anthony Fauci used to come on the angle. It's been a while, but he always seemed a bit intimidated, maybe sometimes even ended up contradicting himself.
You're absolutely right, Laura. That's a great question. Well, it's an obvious good question.
Eventually, most of us are going to be infected with this virus, correct?
No, that's not the case at all. Sooner or later, everybody's going to get infected. That is not a true statement. Virtually everybody is going to wind up getting exposed and likely get infected.
Wait, I was wrong back in, what was that, March of 2020? But there was one moment from early on that stood out. You're satisfied with all of the transparency coming out of China today about the trajectory of the disease and the origin of the disease?
In my direct interaction with Chinese scientists and Chinese health officials, not party politics people, but medical people and scientists, that I can believe what they're telling me.
Okay. China is a country that has hundreds of thousands of people or more in re-education camps. But we're going to trust them and their transparency. Okay. None of that makes any sense. I wonder why he stopped coming on the angle. Must have had other things going on. I don't know, like cover shoots, in-style people. Did he have his Annie Leibovitz moment? Yes, he did. Come on.
Okay. Now, she showed you right there a few short minutes about Dr. Fauci. Trust China. The original Libertarian Party, basically put their founding platform about how the U.S. shouldn't even be doing business with any country that opposes our principles, U.S. principles. And they even went as far as saying we should provide nuclear shield and protection for countries to do. This is where the Libertarian Party went so far off course today. But is this guy a narcissist? Or is he a criminal psychopath for what he's been involved in? He needs to be held accountable. So we got one last clip we want to play for you here. Well, actually, we're going to have a couple short ones, but this one here is worth listening to. This is accomplices to treason and manslaughter. This is a lawsuit. And this should explain to you the urgency of going after these people and why we may not be able to trust the election in November, and what extents will these people go to cover up what they did in their crimes. But here's a lawsuit that was filed by, you'll hear from Dr. Bactrim and Jeff Landry, the AG of Louisiana. Roll this one.
Now, 3 doctors who appeared on the Ingram angle many, many times, you know them all, during the COVID era, have just filed a historic lawsuit against Joe Biden, Fauci, and the HHS, alleging a sinister coordination campaign with social media companies to remove their content. Now, the shocking details and some of those behind this suit in moments.
just doesn't help on the disease spread. The masks not only have not been effective, but have been harmful. And the mandates themselves have created social division in ways that are just really to be regretted. I mean, public health is supposed to create some sorts of unity, not the kinds of division and moralization of behavior that it has created.
Those comments were 100% correct, yet they represented a clear and present threat to the medical establishment. Now, as a result, that roundtable was ripped down from YouTube. They cited misinformation. That's just part of the evidence behind the complaint that was lodged by doctors that the Ingram Angle viewers know very well, like Jay Bhattacharya. He, along with doctors Martin Koldorf and Aaron Carity, joined Missouri and Louisiana in a lawsuit against Biden, Fauci, Javier Becerra, and others over what they say is government-directed social media censorship. Joining me now is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Stanford medical professor, and Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry. Mr. Attorney General, now the lawyer representing the doctors in this case said that this represents the most severe abrogation of the First Amendment in modern times. Why'd you agree with that sentence?
Look, I agree with it. I mean, look, I've always said that there's a line that defines us as citizens from being subjects, and that's the Bill of Rights. And so the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, all the way through the line is what keeps the government from basically infringing upon the rights that we have as citizens. And what is happening here is that the government, instead of the government censoring that speech, they basically are creating and colluding with private actors that basically become arms of the government to censor that exact speech. And that's the suit that we have in Louisiana with Attorney General Eric Schmidt. What we believe is happening is that the government has basically colluded, informed, told the big tech exactly which things to put up, which things to take down, which things to amplify, and what they should be hiding from the American people. And that's just not what the First Amendment was designed to allow the government to do.
Well, yeah, you had
that's
Fauci.
A violation of different.
Yeah, we had Fauci, I think it was just a couple of days ago, saying that basically if we get another pandemic, we didn't go far enough before, Dr. Bhattacharya. And that sentiment was echoed about a year ago by Vivek Murthy, who's now the Attorney General. Watch.
The sites have recognized that this is a challenge, and they've stepped up to do some things to reduce the spread of misinformation, and I credit them for that. But it's not nearly enough, because there's still a tremendous amount of misinformation circulating.
Obviously, Surgeon General, God help us if he was the Attorney General, Dr. Bhattacharya, but that's chilling, that we needed to go further, and Fauci basically says the same thing.
I mean, some of the worst misinformation has come out from the CDC. For instance, that there's no immunity after COVID recovery. A whole bunch of other really poor piece of information, like about the effectiveness of masks and so on. I mean, I think the problem here is that these government entities tried to create an illusion of consensus about all of these supposedly scientific points that didn't actually exist. There never was a consensus, Laura, about lockdowns. There was a tremendous dispute in the scientific community about it, but they wanted to create the illusion that there was, fool the American people into thinking that there was so they could get their way.
Well, back in February, the New York Times reported that the CDC hadn't been publishing large portions of their own COVID data, citing fear that the true vaccine data would be quote, misinterpreted or correctly interpreted as the vaccines being ineffective. Now, Mr. Attorney General, when you see stuff like that, it just seems like this was never about the accuracy of medical information coming out. This has always been about control of the human person, period.
Yes, that's exactly right. You've hit it right on the nose, that this is about control. And that's what the First Amendment was designed to keep the government from being able to control its citizenry through misinformation, which is what the government's doing. Instead of allowing information to flow readily across the country, instead of allowing Americans to look at that information and determine for themselves how to interpret it, the government is doing it for you. That's a violation of the First Amendment, as you know. But what they did was they went out and then used private actors like big tech to do their dirty work. And that's what the suit says. And as you know, when those when those corporations engage with the government in conduct that would otherwise be a violation of the First Amendment, then now there's a linkage and we have a case.
And Dr. Bhattacharya, I have to get to this. This is another story that we're going to see the same type of stuff going on. The left's one-size-fits-all approach to the COVID lockdowns, we know about that. But then when it comes to this monkeypox, the Washington Post says that sex is a major driver of the global outbreak. But health officials and longtime HIV activists say calls for abstinence don't work. And what about this today from USA Today, which outlines how monkeypox can be transmitted? It mentions broken skin, hugging animals, and leaves out one very important transmission source. Dr. Bhattacharya, why the sudden change here and what this actually is?
Well, I think part of the problem here is the history of HIV. Well, we stigmatized, public health ended up stigmatizing a lot of gay individuals, and they wanted to avoid that. But by bending over backwards to avoid that, they actually created harm for the gay population. If they just, with compassion and truth, said, look, these activities are putting you at risk, I think most people are rational. They would understand that these activities are putting them at risk. They could have then had more cooperation for vaccination for the high-risk groups. They could have done a focused protection strategy with compassion. Instead, they are trying to they made the same problem that in HIV. They tried to pretend that everyone was equally at risk. The same problem with COVID. Everyone is equally at risk.
Yeah,
that was a mistake.
The push to get little babies jabbed with the COVID vaccine, right? I mean, the kids with vaccinations who are otherwise healthy. Unbelievable. Attorney General Landry, great to see you. Dr. Bhattacharya, thank you, and good luck with this lawsuit.
Yep, good luck. And they need good luck because it seems like the system's so rigged. Now, Jeff Landry's right on the money when he's talking about First Amendment rights. I mean, the AG from Missouri are attached to this case. Why every AG in the United States isn't jumping into this case should tell you what kind of AG you got. If they're not involved, you need to remove that AG in November. Now, the media hasn't stopped. I will tell you, expect a lot of censorship before this upcoming election. I'll guarantee it. We knew it was coming before the 2020 election. And it's going to come back again. They don't care. The government wants more power and control, and they'll use the media as a tool to get it. Now, keep in mind, and this is the basic principles that we keep going back to on all of our shows. Keep this in mind. The First Amendment was put there in our U.S. Bill of Rights, inalienable rights guaranteed by natural law. And they cannot be changed by any branch of government. That's why our founding fathers put them in there as 10 amendments. The First Amendment is there because the First Amendment is what freedom and liberty is all about. Having the right to say what you need to say. Freedom of expression, freedom of speech. All your freedoms come in that First Amendment. The Second Amendment was put there to protect the first. There's a reason why it followed directly. And the reason why it's worded the way it is, that we are responsible to protect our own liberties. And that right that they're granting shall not be infringed. There's a whole reason. Our founders' vast wisdom. And it's all to protect us from what we see transpiring. So what do we see transpire? Keep in mind now, treason, national security, and those who are accomplices to violating our national security and our rights is not only done by other governments like China. I mean, they'll all be involved. It can be done by international groups like the UN, which is why when you see the UN pass something, unless the US Congress votes on it and the president signs it into law, it doesn't mean anything. It can't even be enforced in our country. They've said a lot of things, and Ambassador Back said, yeah, I voted in favor of it. Well, Congress doesn't approve it. The president doesn't sign it. It doesn't mean a thing. So, with that being said, play this short minute.
One of the features of this fourth industrial revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
It doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you. If you take genetic editing, just as an example.
And taken together, these forces are effectively hollowing out the middle class because we're in the middle of something else going on here. Nothing to do with Donald Trump. We're in the middle of what I call, other people call, the fourth industrial revolution.
Recall through the show, you heard about Event 201. That was put together by the World Economic Forum. And they've been involved in a lot of these things. So here's what it comes down to. They've all been caught attempting to use the human race as test subjects, like a testing animal, a lab rat. Is it high treason or crimes against humanity? I mean, Dr. Bactrim made an interesting statement saying they're doing all this to get their way. Well, what does that really mean? When you listen to that clip of Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, who made that unholy alliance with Bill Gates and Dr. Fauci back in 2000, all of a sudden, all these new viruses started popping up everywhere. Once the CRISPR became effective and put into straight out use and even become inexpensive, we've seen a lot of people suffer. Too many people have suffered from this. Many have died, had family members suffering from all these different diseases. It really intensified after that and the Holy Alliance began over 2 decades ago. So, is it? We got high treason, crimes against humanity. Will Fauci run? This is all being done for some twisted group of people of a vision of personal gain. Even the thought of some form of like eternal life and mortality. And they have no regard for the pain and suffering they cause on the human race. That's something you need to consider. But I hope you enjoyed our shows tonight, the 3 segments, and I hope you understand and start to put the pieces together about the significance of that hearing that Rand Paul and why all these events that followed seem to be outrageous. Like, how could the DOJ get away with what they did to Trump? What were they really looking for? There's some kind of information in there. Or would they violate his constitutional rights? It's never been done before. They've been violating our constitutional rights for years. Just many people have never really exercised their constitutional rights to extent of others. Anybody who has, what's with this FBI? What's with the DOJ? Why did they do this now? I guess the word was they had this thing sketched out from May, and they made the attack now. What, a week after Rand brought this all up? Is there a connection? These aren't theories anymore. They are conspiracies. It's time for you to accept them and be prepared. Hey, good night.